The 11th century. 10 mind-blowing facts about the century that decided to conquer everything. The year is 1001 Anno Domini, and if you're keeping score, medieval civilization just had its best century ever. The barbarian invasions are over, the great empires have stabilized, and everyone seems to have figured out how to coexist without burning each other's monasteries down. European nobles are writing poetry instead of planning raids. Islamic scholars are translating Aristotle instead of conquering new territories. Even the Vikings have become respectable Christians who build cathedrals instead of torching them. If this were a modern political campaign, the 10th century's slogan would have been "Mission accomplished." Medieval Europe had solved its fundamental problems: political fragmentation, religious chaos, and nomadic invasions. The next logical step was a nice, peaceful century of consolidation and cultural development. Then the reports start arriving. A Norman bastard has conquered England in a single battle. A handful of French knights have somehow captured Jerusalem from the mightiest Islamic empire on earth. The Byzantine Empire, that 1,000-year survivor, is getting systematically dismantled by Turkish nomads nobody had heard of 20 years ago. The Pope is raising armies and declaring holy wars. Italian merchants are founding commercial empires that make kings look poor. By 1100, you're staring at a map that looks like someone threw medieval Europe into a blender and hit the conquer everything button. The stable world of 1001 has been replaced by something that looks like organized chaos on a continental scale. Welcome to the 11th century, when medieval civilization looked at the hard-won stability of the 10th century and said, "Nice work, but we're going to completely redesign the world now." This is the century that proved medieval ambition was bigger than medieval common sense. Here are 10 mind-blowing facts about the century that decided conquest was more fun than stability. Fact number 1. The Normans conquered 3 kingdoms simultaneously and made it look easy. The Normans, who were just Christianized Vikings with better PR, pulled off the most audacious series of conquests in medieval history by simultaneously taking over England, southern Italy, and Sicily, while nobody was paying attention. The Norman conquest of England, 1066, was medieval warfare's equivalent of a perfect game. William the Conqueror landed with 7,000 men, fought one decisive battle at Hastings, and within months controlled a kingdom of over 1 million people. The speed and thoroughness of Norman administrative takeover was so complete that Anglo-Saxon England essentially disappeared overnight. But while everyone was watching William conquer England, other Normans were quietly taking over the entire southern half of Italy. The Hauteville family, led by Robert Guiscard and Bohemond, defeated Byzantine armies, Lombard princes, and papal forces to carve out the most powerful kingdom in the Mediterranean. The Norman conquest of Sicily from Islamic forces was a masterpiece of medieval military engineering. They turned Muslim military techniques against Muslim armies, used captured Islamic siege equipment, and employed local populations as administrators while maintaining Norman military control. What made Norman success so remarkable was their ability to adapt to local conditions while maintaining their military edge. In England, they preserved Anglo-Saxon legal traditions while imposing Norman feudalism. In Italy, they combined Byzantine administrative systems with Western European military organization. In Sicily, they created a hybrid Christian-Islamic kingdom that became medieval Europe's most sophisticated state. The Normans didn't just conquer, they revolutionized. Norman England developed administrative systems that influenced European governance for centuries. Norman Sicily became a center of learning that preserved Greek, Arabic, and Latin scholarship. Norman Italy became the launching pad for Crusader expansion into the eastern Mediterranean. By 1100, Norman kingdoms stretched from the Scottish border to the coast of North Africa, making the descendants of Viking raiders into the most successful dynasty in medieval Europe. Fact number 2. The Seljuk Turks appeared out of nowhere and destroyed everyone. The Seljuk Turks, a nomadic people from Central Asia, conquered the Islamic world, shattered Byzantine power, and created an empire stretching from Afghanistan to Anatolia in less than 50 years. The Seljuk expansion began when Tughril Beg, from 1037 to 1063, recognized that the fragmented Islamic world was ripe for conquest by a unified military force. The Seljuks combined traditional Turkish horse archery with Islamic religious authority to create armies that could defeat both nomadic competitors and settled civilizations. The Seljuk conquest of the Abbasid Caliphate was a masterpiece of political manipulation. Instead of destroying the Caliph, the Seljuks became his protectors, using religious legitimacy to justify their political control while maintaining the appearance of Islamic continuity. The destruction of Byzantine power at Manzikert, 1071, was the most consequential battle of the 11th century. Emperor Romanos IV's capture and the subsequent collapse of Byzantine Anatolian defenses opened the heartland of the Eastern Roman Empire to Turkish settlement. What made the Seljuks so successful was their ability to combine nomadic military mobility with settled administrative expertise. They recruited Persian bureaucrats, Arab scholars, and Byzantine engineers to create governmental systems that could govern territories too large for traditional nomadic administration. The Seljuk Empire became the dominant power in the Islamic world by creating institutions that balanced Turkish military traditions with Islamic religious authority. Their madrasas, religious schools, became centers of learning that influenced Islamic intellectual development for centuries. The Seljuk success was so complete that it forced European response. The Byzantine Empire's desperate appeals for help against Turkish expansion directly led to the Crusades, making the Seljuks inadvertently responsible for the most famous military campaigns in medieval history. By 1100, the Seljuk Empire controlled more territory than any Islamic state since the early Abbasids, proving that nomadic conquest could create lasting civilizational change. Fact number 3. The First Crusade succeeded through pure luck and European stupidity. The First Crusade, from 1095 to 1099, was such an improbable military adventure that its success convinced everyone involved that God was personally directing European foreign policy. Pope Urban II's call for a crusade was intended to reunite Eastern and Western Christianity while channeling European military violence toward external enemies. What he got was a chaotic mixture of religious fanatics, ambitious nobles, and professional soldiers who had no unified command, no strategic plan, and no realistic understanding of what they were attempting. The Crusader march across Europe was a disaster that somehow turned into a diplomatic success. The various Crusader armies fought each other, massacred Jewish communities, and arrived in Constantinople in such disarray that Emperor Alexios III considered turning them away. The Crusader conquest of Antioch, 1098, should have been impossible. The city was impregnable, the siege lasted 8 months, and the Crusaders were simultaneously besieging and being besieged. Their victory was so unlikely that Muslim sources described it as divine intervention favoring the Christians. The capture of Jerusalem, 1099, was even more improbable. The Crusaders arrived with a decimated army, no siege equipment, and no naval support. The city fell after a 5-week siege that succeeded primarily because the Fatimid garrison was too small to defend the walls effectively. What made Crusader success so remarkable was their ability to exploit Islamic political fragmentation. Sunni and Shia Muslim rulers were so busy fighting each other that they couldn't coordinate effective resistance against the relatively small Crusader armies. The Crusader states established in the aftermath combined Western European feudalism with Middle Eastern political systems to create hybrid kingdoms that survived for 2 centuries. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa became centers of cultural exchange between Christianity and Islam. The First Crusade's success convinced medieval Europe that military pilgrimage was not only possible, but profitable, establishing patterns of religious warfare that would influence European politics for centuries. Fact number 4. The investiture controversy nearly destroyed the Holy Roman Empire. The conflict between Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV over who controlled church appointments escalated into a civil war that almost shattered the most powerful kingdom in Europe. The investiture controversy began when Pope Gregory VII, from 1073 to 1085, declared that secular rulers could no longer appoint bishops and abbots. This wasn't just a religious reform. It was a direct challenge to the governmental system that had made the Holy Roman Empire possible. Emperor Henry IV, 1056 to 1106, recognized that papal control over episcopal appointments would destroy imperial administration. German kings governed through bishops who served as royal administrators. Without control over church appointments, the Holy Roman Empire would fragment into competing duchies. The papal excommunication of Henry IV, 1076, was medieval Europe's equivalent of a nuclear weapon. By declaring the emperor spiritually dead, the Pope released Henry's subjects from their oaths of loyalty and invited rebellion against imperial authority. Henry's humiliation at Canossa, 1077, where he stood barefoot in the snow for 3 days, seeking papal forgiveness, was the most dramatic moment in medieval church-state relations. But Henry's submission was tactical rather than genuine. He was buying time to reorganize his forces. The subsequent civil war in Germany, 1077 to 1122, was one of the most destructive conflicts in medieval European history. Imperial and papal armies devastated the German countryside, while competing claimants fought for control of the crown. The Concordat of Worms, 1122, resolved the immediate crisis by dividing spiritual and temporal authority over church appointments. But the deeper constitutional issues remained unresolved, creating institutional tensions that would plague the Holy Roman Empire for centuries. The investiture controversy established the principle that spiritual authority could challenge secular power, creating ideological foundations for conflicts between church and state that would define medieval European politics. Fact number 5. The Song dynasty invented the future and nobody noticed. While Europeans were fighting over who could appoint bishops, the Chinese Song dynasty was quietly creating the most advanced civilization in human history through innovations that wouldn't reach Europe for centuries. The Song dynasty, 960 to 1279, developed economic systems that supported a population of over 100 million people, making China more populous than all of Europe combined. Chinese cities dwarfed European settlements. Kaifeng had over 1 million inhabitants, when London had barely 20,000. Song technological innovations were so advanced, they seemed like magic to foreign visitors. Chinese engineers developed water-powered machinery sophisticated metallurgy, and manufacturing techniques that mass-produced everything from weapons to household goods. The invention of gunpowder weapons revolutionized warfare in ways that Europeans wouldn't understand for generations. Song armies used flamethrowers, grenades, and primitive cannons that made traditional medieval warfare obsolete. Song commercial innovations created the world's first paper money, credit systems, and international banking networks. Chinese merchants traded across Asia, using financial instruments that eliminated the need to transport precious metals across vast distances. The Song examination system created the world's first meritocratic bureaucracy, where governmental positions were awarded based on intellectual ability rather than birth or military service. This produced administrative efficiency that made European kingdoms look primitive by comparison. Song cultural achievements were equally impressive. Chinese scholars developed printing technology that made books affordable, created encyclopedias that preserved vast amounts of knowledge, and established schools that provided education to a larger percentage of the population than anywhere else in the world. The Song military was paradoxically the dynasty's greatest weakness. Despite technological superiority, Song armies consistently lost battles against nomadic neighbors who combined traditional mobility with Chinese military innovations. Song China's failure to expand beyond East Asia meant that their technological and social innovations remained isolated from the rest of the world, creating a civilization that was centuries ahead of its time, but geographically contained. Fact number 6. Italian merchants accidentally invented capitalism. Italian city-states developed commercial techniques that transformed medieval European economy from subsistence agriculture to international trade networks that made merchants richer than kings. The Italian commercial revolution began in cities like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, where merchants developed new forms of business organization that could finance long-distance trade. The commenda system allowed investors to pool resources for commercial ventures while limiting individual risk. Italian banking innovations created credit systems that eliminated the need for merchants to carry large amounts of precious metals. Bills of exchange, letters of credit, and international banking networks made European commerce more efficient than anything since the Roman Empire. The Italian development of double-entry bookkeeping was as revolutionary as any military conquest. Systematic accounting allowed merchants to track profits, losses, and inventory with precision that made large-scale commerce profitable and predictable. Italian maritime innovations transformed Mediterranean trade. New ship designs, navigation techniques, and port facilities made sea travel faster, safer, and more profitable than overland routes. The Italian commercial success was so complete that Italian merchants became the dominant economic force in medieval Europe. Venetian traders established permanent colonies throughout the eastern Mediterranean, while Genoese merchants financed kingdoms and employed kings as their agents. Italian political innovations accompanied commercial success. City-states developed republican governments that balanced merchant interests with popular participation, creating political systems that challenged traditional feudal monarchy. The Italian commercial revolution created wealth that transformed European culture. Italian merchants became patrons of art, scholarship, and architecture, establishing cultural patterns that would culminate in the Renaissance. By 1100, Italian commercial networks connected Europe with Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, creating the first truly global economy in human history. Fact number 7. The Almoravids conquered 2 continents simultaneously. The Almoravid movement, which began as a religious reform among Berber tribes, created an empire that stretched from the Sahara Desert to the Pyrenees Mountains by combining Islamic religious authority with military innovation. The Almoravid expansion began when Abdallah ibn Yasin, 1040 to 1059, convinced Berber tribes that Islamic religious purification required political unification. The movement combined traditional Berber military skills with Islamic religious motivation to create armies that could conquer both nomadic competitors and settled civilizations. The Almoravid conquest of Morocco and western Algeria eliminated the fragmented Berber kingdoms that had dominated North Africa since the decline of the Fatimids. Their capital at Marrakech became a center of Islamic learning and architectural innovation. The Almoravid intervention in Al-Andalus, 1086, saved Islamic Spain from Christian reconquest. The victory at Sagrajas demonstrated that African Islamic armies could defeat European Christian forces, reversing the momentum of Christian expansion in the Iberian Peninsula. The Almoravid Empire became the dominant power in Western Islam by creating institutions that combined Berber military traditions with Islamic religious authority. Their madrasas and mosques became centers of learning that influenced Islamic intellectual development throughout North and West Africa. The Almoravid success was remarkable because it demonstrated that religious reform movements could create lasting political change. Unlike previous Islamic dynasties that relied on military conquest, the Almoravids maintained power through religious legitimacy and popular support. The Almoravid architectural achievements transformed the appearance of Islamic cities. The Kutubiyya Mosque in Marrakech and the expansion of the Great Mosque of Cordoba established architectural traditions that influenced Islamic design for centuries. By 1100, the Almoravid Empire controlled territories larger than the Byzantine Empire, proving that African Islamic civilization could compete with European and Middle Eastern powers. Fact number 8. The Scots invented modern kingship. The Kingdom of Scotland, under David I, 1124 to 1153, developed governmental institutions that were more sophisticated than anything in medieval Europe by combining Celtic traditions with Norman innovations. David I's institutional reforms created a hybrid system that balanced traditional Scottish clan structures with European feudalism. Scottish kings maintained Celtic concepts of kingship while adopting Norman administrative techniques and military organization. The Scottish Church became a major force in European Christianity by maintaining independence from both English and papal authority. Scottish monasteries developed distinctive traditions that combined Celtic religious practices with continental European scholarship. Scottish commercial development was remarkably advanced for a relatively poor kingdom. Scottish merchants established trading relationships throughout Europe, while Scottish crafts and agricultural products became valued commodities in international markets. The Scottish legal system combined Celtic customary law with European legal principles to create a judicial system that balanced royal authority with local traditions. Scottish legal innovations influenced European jurisprudence for centuries. Scottish cultural achievements were equally impressive. Scottish scholars, poets, and architects created works that combined Celtic artistic traditions with European intellectual developments. The Scottish success in maintaining independence while adopting European innovations proved that small kingdoms could compete with larger empires through superior organization and institutional development. Fact number 9. The Patarine movement almost destroyed the Catholic Church. The Patarine movement in Milan challenged papal authority and created alternative forms of Christianity that nearly shattered the unity of medieval European religion. The Patarine movement began as a reform movement that opposed clerical corruption and demanded that the Church return to apostolic poverty. But the movement quickly evolved into a challenge to the entire structure of medieval Christianity. Patarine theology argued that the Church's wealth and political power contradicted Christian teachings, and that true Christians should reject hierarchical religious authority in favor of direct spiritual experience. The Patarine political program was equally radical. They argued that secular rulers had no authority over religious matters, and that Christian communities should govern themselves according to gospel principles rather than feudal law. The papal response to the Patarine movement was swift and violent. Pope Gregory VII declared the Patarines heretical and authorized military campaigns to suppress their communities. The Patarine movement's influence extended far beyond Milan. Similar reform movements appeared throughout Europe, creating a network of religious dissent that challenged Catholic authority. The suppression of the Patarine movement established precedents for religious persecution that would influence European politics for centuries. The techniques developed to combat Patarine heresy became the foundation for later inquisitions. Fact number 10. The 11th century proved medieval ambition had no limits. The most mind-blowing fact about the 11th century is that it demonstrated medieval civilization's capacity for simultaneous expansion in multiple directions while maintaining cultural coherence and institutional stability. Every major success of the 11th century represented unprecedented ambition. The Normans conquered 3 kingdoms simultaneously. The Crusaders attempted to capture the Holy Land. The Seljuks created an empire spanning 3 continents. Italian merchants developed global trade networks. The 11th century established patterns of expansion that would define medieval European civilization for centuries. The combination of religious motivation, military innovation, and commercial opportunity created a dynamic that made medieval Europe inherently expansionist. Medieval societies in the 11th century proved they could maintain cultural identity while adapting to radically different circumstances. Normans became English, French, and Italian, while remaining distinctively Norman. Crusaders became Middle Eastern, while maintaining European religious traditions. Most importantly, the 11th century demonstrated that medieval civilization had developed the institutional capacity to sustain multiple simultaneous expansions without fragmenting into chaos. The stable world of 1001 had become the launching pad for the most ambitious century in medieval history. By 1100, medieval Europe had proven that the organizational achievements of the 10th century weren't endpoints but beginnings. The medieval world had learned that conquest was more profitable than stability, and it was just getting warmed up.